All right, I think we can get started. If you can kindly take your seats, we're gonna get started. Good afternoon, everybody, and good day to those of you who are joining us online, and welcome to a beautiful spring day in Ithaca. Yeah, for those who are online, it's not quite a spring day yet, so. Oh, it is indeed a big pleasure for me and a special honor to introduce this year's distinguished speaker in global development. This annual event brings to Cornell eminent scholars and development practitioners working in the areas aligned with the core strengths and signature strengths of global development. That's environmental sustainability, food and nutritional security, and well-being and inclusion. Our speaker today leads an organization that not only addresses these three critical areas, but does so through an integrated and innovative approach, breaking disciplinary silos and often finding holistic solutions. This year's distinguished speaker in global development is Mr. Juan Lucas Restrepo, and he is the Director General of the Alliance Bioversity and the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, also known as CIAT. Together, this organization has a global footprint in more than 60 countries, and the Alliance is one of the biggest centers within the CGIAR system. Previously, Juan Lucas served as Director General for AgroServia, which is the National Agricultural Research Institute for Colombia, and he also served as the Vice Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development in Colombia. Well, Juan Lucas has had a long and distinguished career, and this comes as no surprise, at least to me, because he's a graduate of Cornell University. Go Big Red. See, thank you. Juan Lucas was here and he graduated in 1998 with a master's in agricultural economics. He was actually my classmate here at Cornell. We were studying at the same time. I can tell you, I learned a couple of salsa moves from him on some of those graduate school nights, and his wife is even a better dancer. She's also in the audience today. Today, Juan Lucas will be sharing insights from the work of the Alliance Bioversity and CIAT on food systems and landscapes that sustain the planet, drive prosperity, and nourish people. Please give him a big, warm Cornell welcome. Juan Lucas.
Thank you, Ed. I hope you can hear me well. All right, great. So it's a pleasure to be here with my wife, Marta, who's sitting in front. We came to this town 30 years ago. So we're celebrating our 30th anniversary, and this is part of our journey. And of course, when Ed invited me to give this presentation, I said, well, this cannot be a better coincidence than doing this double celebration and coming back to this beautiful and amazing university. My wife is a writer, and I'm agricultural economist, and she used to write. At that time, there was no email, was just starting, so she wrote a lot of letters in paper, and the way she headed all of her letters was saying, Ithaca Pueblo Helado, Ithaca frozen town, because she hated the cold, and when we came here, Ed promised, it's gonna be April, it's gonna be beautiful, the blossoms, everything. So anyway, we are here and we're still very happy, independent of this not so beautiful weather for this time of the year. So the idea, and let me see if this works, is signal to you some of the work we're doing from the Alliance, from our research. And let me see if this got it. Did you do it or did I do it? Okay, I'll just use this one, no problem. So basically, what and this is kind of the take home message, it's very difficult nowadays to just focus and develop your development work around malnutrition or biodiversity or climate change, but we really need to look at the nexus. The work nowadays demands integrated approaches. 5 years ago, when the parties of these Rio conventions met, there was not a significant conversation about food systems. The conversations were around the energy transition, infrastructure, etc. Last year, all COPs had a food day, and food systems transformation is seen as the glue and the interconnectedness that is needed to make sure development goals are met. And of course, to meet the 2030 agenda, especially the Zero Hunger, Climate Action, and SDG 15 Life for Land, we need to definitely work at the nexus. So that's going to be kind of my main message. And I would like to very briefly start with some global data. And I'm pretty sure you've seen this a lot, but so I'm not going to take a lot of time on this. And the first thing, and when I woke up this morning and I opened the Cornell webpage, and in the Cornell Chronicle, there is an article on the need for additional and continued investment in research to maintain U.S. agricultural production. And it was very clear that the level of investment needs to be, ramped up, or just to maintain the needs of the U.S. In terms of the pressure from climate change. You call it as you want, but raising temperatures, climate variability, etc., really generating a significant impact in agricultural productivity. And if you add to that, not only from the pressure of climate, but from the pressure of humans in biodiversity, this is adding to what I personally consider an even greater drama. And it's a greater drama because in climate change, you are already seeing some of the modelers saying, well, in 30 years, 40 years, we're going to be able to curb this tendency, and we're going to start seeing temperatures go back to whatever is normal at that moment. But in terms of biodiversity, sometimes we are very concerned when we read that a rhinoceros is almost extinct, and that makes us very emotional. But the loss of species and the pace of that loss, whether it's a worm or a bird or an insect, it kind of breaks all of these ecosystems equilibrium and generates a planet that where that specific species will not be with us again. So there is no recovery from biodiversity loss. What is lost, and then society will have to deal with a narrower biodiversity to sort out our welfare and also our pleasure, being and living a more boring planet because there is fewer species is probably not something we would like to have going forward. And then, of course, the way we practice and have practiced agriculture for the past few decades has been quite positive in some elements. It has increased production, productivity. There's been a lot of great technologies supporting intensification, but that has come at a cost, and the cost is related to soil health, to malnutrition, and to really, bringing nutrition into a too high dependency on a very few number of crops. And probably this, but 3 crops, rice, maize, and wheat, make up 60% of the calories all of humankind consumes. And we're now relying, whereas 200, 300 years ago, we had more than 1,000 species that were significant in our diets. Today, less than 200 make up from almost everything we eat. So there's been of course, lots of success in terms of intensification, but at a huge cost in terms of the biodiversity that arrives to our plates. And the nutritional content of that biodiversity, because these crops have been bred with productivity in mind, not necessarily to deliver through those species the best nutritional outcome possible. And then, of course, as an effect of that system, we're also seeing very concerning impacts, economic impacts, but of course, in terms of livelihoods, in terms of quality of life, in terms of health, of what is happening in terms of malnutrition, obesity rates, which is something that's generating, it's already a crisis, but in terms of the trends, it's becoming worse and worse, costing the health sector, costing productivity, a lot of resources. So that's just kind of where we are. There's a lot of data there that probably you read, and this is just a signal. You know, if the status quo, just keeping things as they are, sorting in siloed manners through new science, etc., solutions is not going to get us too far. So I will use most of my time to talk about examples of solutions. There are ways to work in an integrated manner so we can really address the climate, the environmental, and the nutritional challenge at the nexus. So starting from the local level, at the production level, there is a very beautiful experience that I invite you to know about, as it sets a good example of how you can develop end-to-end processes. And when I mean end-to-end, in terms of beans, you know, beans, Phaseolus beans, common beans, are originated in this part of the world, in Central America, the Andean countries, and for decades, they've been collected into, so their conservation is secured. And our organization manages a gene bank. It's called Future Seeds, based in Cali, Colombia. And we hold more than 36,000 accessions, meaning different bean varieties, 36,000, which have been collected across farmers' fields from wild species relatives. And they provide the basis for many other crops for the kind of work we do here. So that genetic diversity through modern tools, phenotyping, genotyping, more and more computer vision, AI models, etc., it's bred into materials that are then, of course, used in Latin America, used in many places, but in this specific case, go into what is called the Pan-African Bean Research Alliance, PABRA. And PABRA is a network of public and private organizations from national innovation systems, a small private sector that works on seed marketing. And this has been supported in a consistent manner for many years from the donor community, as well as from the national programs. And it's basically become like a very well-oiled process that allows farmers to get on a timely manner the seeds, the new varieties they need to cope with changes in temperatures, with pest pressure, etc. But that is also being used as a delivery mechanism for more nutritious food. So it's not only that beans are great sources of protein and nutritious, but we have selected those beans to make sure they deliver high iron and zinc. And this is, of course, connected to supporting children, supporting in very clear and important moments where they are developing their cognitive ability. So it has a huge impact on the infants in that part of the world, and keeping in mind, as an example, that heads of household, usually women, don't have the time to, pre-cook the beans and that they take a lot of time cooking. So how you also breed for lower cooking times and how you work with the private sector. So those beans are made readily available so they can, you less time to cook them and less energy. So it's a systemic approach that's been proven to work very well and is supporting millions of households in terms of their income. So it's an example of how you look at the nexus at the production level in a successful manner. A second example, and as you also know, like 50% of the habitable earth is used in agriculture, and from that part, there is a significant share of land that is degraded because of the way agriculture has been developed, and that is again a vicious circle where productivity goes down, where the pressure on soil health is quite negative. So it's again like a trap, like a poverty trap we need to get away from. And in here, what we have learned is that through networks, genetic resources networks that were supported by our organization for decades, we started to get very deep knowledge on the different uses of indigenous trees and what they could do for land and soil restoration, to provide ecosystem services such as water retention or economic services for communities or carbon sequestration. And what we have done is to use that wealth of knowledge and connect it again in another value chain where we work with communities, with local schools, with small producers that are able through our knowledge to identify those trees on the landscape that are the best providers of seeds and of enough genetic diversity. So those seeds go into a process where looking at farmers' preference and the specific service that tree can provide in a specific part of the territory, those trees are then brought into farms and taken care of by farmers. And through blockchain and different technologies, we have a way to monitor what is happening to those trees and also to start paying farmers for the ecosystem services they are providing. So you get restoration, you get an economic recognition and incentive to farming communities. And again, you start through trees, the proper specific trees you need at the agricultural landscapes to bring things back where they need to be. And another example, and of course, and I see Mario there that's been working on livestock for a while. Livestock is a very critical and important value chain that, depending on the context, creates more or less challenges in terms of the use of the land, in terms of climate change, methane emissions, etc. And there is a lot of work trying to sort these issues. What we found here again is that when we see how breeding for new crops has worked in the past, is that we've been focusing on what happens from the soil up. So we look at the productivity, and we look at the quantity of forage that is offered, etc. But now there is tools, and there is an understanding that we also need to look down into the soil and start selecting and breeding for roots, for carbon sequestration, etc. And we do this in rice, and we're doing this more and more in forages. What we have seen here is a an investment and a collaboration with the private sector, and we're talking, and Ed was there like a year ago, where we are in a landscape of natural savannas where the stocking rate is minimal. You need 17 hectares to be able to sustain one animal, one head of cattle. 17 hectares is about probably 25, 26 acres. And through these pastures, we're bringing that, you don't need 17 hectares, but 1 hectare per head of cattle. So the changes in productivity are fantastic. And these grasses are starting to be used to change the soil composition from a topsoil that's washed by the rains in the native savannas and could be 2-3 centimeters. The rest is sands and clays, into something where these pastures are managing to get their roots down to 2.3 meters deep, where microbial activity is minimal, therefore becoming carbon storage machines. And if you combine this with the genetics of the animals, with management, with speeding up the cycle and the time for these animals to leave the farm, we are finding that it is possible in that specific context to generate carbon positive livestock, which is something that was unheard of in the past. And this is an experience that already has about 10,000 hectares, like 15,000 acres implemented, that will become probably 200,000 hectares in the short time, as there is a lot of interest from the private sector in investing in this kind of livestock, more sustainable model. And then my last example is on other things that we need to do and we need to understand, and this comes from the consumer. We need to be much better at understanding the food environment and the consumer behaviors within that food environment. And what we have found here through this research project in Cali, Colombia, is that countries, governments have a wealth of data that is totally disconnected. We have data on imports, exports, we have data on trade. We know in a significant way where the food that's used in one city, where it comes from what production areas, what is imported. We have price monitoring in many places of the world, but those information systems have been set up for a very specific siloed purpose and have not been brought together. So what Plaza Colombia is basically able to tell you is what's happening with the diets, across segments of the population, what poor people are having access to, how affordable is their diet, and how much are they meeting or not their minimum nutritional needs. And this information, of course, then allows municipalities, the private sector, ministries of agriculture, health, development, etc., to tweak things. As you have that information available, then you can start using it into science to policy interfaces. So that's another straightforward manner, but very impactful and effective way to also, from the consumer side, from the food environment, to seek to change things around how the food system can be optimized. So in terms of the way forward, a few additional messages. The first thing is that we cannot think about science or research in isolation. we always need to understand ex ante before developing our work and saying, oh, we're going to get this fantastic outcome in terms of my own research. What are the pathways into use, into impact, and who needs to be there? So these examples I gave are positive, are impactful because they all have required to set up a network of partners, global, local, from the public, from the private sector, making sure communities and users are accounted for and are part of the decision making. So there's no systems level change without very deep engagement and partnership. The second message is that our nature we tend to be very optimistic, and we feel that there is this silver bullet that will sort out everything, and the reality is not, it's really far from there. Context specificity is absolutely critical. What works in the livestock example in those acid savannas in Colombia is probably not going to work in what looks like similar savannas in Africa, because the cultural context, the way those systems are managed, and many of the agroecological conditions are different. So context specificity is critical. It is critical also to avoid being dogmatic. So we've been living this beauty contest, saying, oh, we just need to dedicate ourselves to agricultural intensification, meaning we need to put pressure on the systems and produce more with less inputs. And that is perfectly valid in some contexts, but in others, we may be better suited through agroecological transitions that really challenge the way those production systems are there, and where you need to incorporate more diversity, and we need to change the relationship between labor and inputs and capital, and that's super important. And of course, what we are seeing is that even though the challenges are so significant, what the evidence is telling us is that there is a lot of solution spaces. Sometimes things get a bit slowed down in the politics, but there is also the need to become much better and more effective in connecting knowledge and organizing it in a way that it can allow decision makers to move things forward and understanding their limits. Sometimes we just, again, very optimistic, a bit naive, and propose solutions to public decision makers that are not going to work for them. So how you calibrate things in a way so that change is more feasible. And then in terms of what do we need to keep working on ensuring that both the public and the private finance reward sustainability. We still see, and this is, in many cases, an agricultural bank in a developing country, first, risk averse. They only lend to those that are established and are larger, and the marginal producers are not there. But then the way they lend and the way they monitor their investment from the bank is very simple, as it only considers economic return. Is this project able to pay back without taking into account what is happening at that community, at that farm level, in terms of sustainability, what's happening with soils, what's happening with the longer-term endeavor of those communities and those families. We need to transform narratives from sectoral to systemic. It's very positive, very good to see food systems as the glue, and as the more we talk about food systems and less about agriculture or consumption or health or climate, the easier it will be to use that narrative from a positive change. We've seen food systems being criticized and rightly so, because a lot of negative impact in terms of climate, etc., and environment comes from the way those systems are run. But we also see, given the coverage, the space they use in the world, that they are becoming and need to become solution spaces. We cannot expect solutions to come from any other place. In terms of policy frameworks, we also need to make sure that they bring biodiversity and food systems central to climate action, as I just mentioned. We need to make sure, and this is already happening, that the governments that have commitments across the different US conventions, they use food systems again as the glue. So when they serve a commitment for their plan in the biodiversity convention, that same effort serves their commitments on the climate convention or the desertification one. So how those plans that are usually, one is led by a Minister of Agriculture, another one by a Minister of Environment, another one by a Minister of Health, that through those indicators and those commitments, you can also de-silo how the public sector and governments are looking into this. And to close, academia and research from academia is and will remain absolutely critical. And of course, Cornell with CALS and your other schools is a very significant player that needs to support us in this endeavor. So in closing, and I hope I was able to convey to you that we don't have any chance but just to go for this way of working into food systems transformation. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Juan Lucas. We have about 10 minutes for Q&A and discussion. If you can raise your hand, make your question as brief as possible. Maybe introduce yourself as well. So, and those who are joining online, just type in your question and we'll try to read some of the questions back as well. So let's start with you, Elsa.
Hi, my name is Summer, and I'm interested. I mean, this is a global matter, but do you think it's more on every country, like the responsibility should be shared, or every country specifically come up with their own plan? Like, how do you try to organize this?
No, that's a great question. I think we need to, and we're seeing this. No country in itself can be has the assets, the knowledge, the capacity to devise a full solution for their. So, but most of the responsibility lies on them. So we need systems that are bottom up, starting at the landscape, at the community level, going into the national domain, national policy, but again, also making sure that there is a connection at the international level. I was discussing with a vice president of the Ford Foundation a few weeks ago about the current, the big challenge we have at the moment, because it's not only in the US, everywhere in the world we see this very strong polarization, political polarization. It could be right versus left, it could be liberals versus conservatives, etc. It's very common. And there may be a possibility that global public goods or public goods become again very critical in terms of bringing people together around win-win spaces, win-win solutions. One of the beauty about investing in public goods is that it's not all are benefited, what you see is, of course, some benefiting more than others, but as long as you are in a space where there is mutual benefits, then you can start work on equity. How do we make sure that those that are not getting their share, are better supported and benefited? So I see public goods as a very critical space in the future, not only to sort things out, but also to bring society a bit closer together and help, get us this polarization in the back.
Hi, my name is Maria Boa. I am a PhD student in global development. And I have a question. You mentioned that only science solutions is not gonna be enough. It's not gonna take us too far. And as a social scientist, I would like to ask you, what type of skills are valued by centers like the Alliance to design, translate solutions that can really meet the needs of society?
One of our learnings is that in the past, our organization, both people working on the biology and the breeding and fishes, etc., quite disconnected from our social sciences, our economy, etc., with relative success. But the more they come into multidisciplinary efforts, the more they plan projects together and understand each other's contribution and need for the other's knowledge and skills, the likelihood of those outcomes being not only positive but uptaking it becomes much higher. So we need to employ as a skill. We need to learn. We don't need to be an expert in other disciplines, but we need to know enough to be able to bridge and to understand how we can add that knowledge as any of these solutions needs social sciences, needs geneticists, etc. They are all in there. We just make sure that each contribution is well connected to the others.
Yeah, we have a question from the online audience. Woody, our TA is going to read out.
Yeah, this question is from John Porterfield. He asks, is there a source of pilot study support for, firstly, an open weave mesh to stabilize amendment sprouts for dryland restoration, or an off-frame vehicle that
Can I read the question because I'm getting of difficulty understand. And this H, this. Is there a source of pilot study support for an open weave mesh to stabilize amendments sprouts for drylands restoration? An all-terrain vehicle that provides water, shade, minerals, etc., moving about drylands to herd livestock for managed grazing. Landform analysis to initiate water slowing to prevent flooding damage and build groundwater. Sure. And no, what I would say is that there is like this mesh technology. You tend to think that is the silver bullet. But of course, this is very important, very significant technology. You just need to understand the bigger context, the community, the local economics, to make sure that these type of solutions are really usable and adoptable and can be brought up into scale. But as such, this is a perfect example of something very robust from a technological dimension, that if it doesn't account for the rest of the dimensions, it may not be taking up as one would expect.
We have the next question. Juan Lucas, if I may ask you just to stand behind that physical microphone. It looks like the wireless one is cutting in and out. So.
Okay.
So yes, next question.
Hi, I'm Isabel. I work at the Boyce Thompson Institute. I was just wondering how you anticipate fungi fitting into this larger picture of food systems. I know there's been research already published about growing mushrooms using diaper waste as substrate, but that's an important kind of consideration of will people eat the protein provided if it's grown on diaper waste. It's just a really cool avenue for these to intersect. So I was wondering what you anticipate the impact of fungi being.
It's on.
This is gone. Okay. Let me try this one again. It's on. Sorry. Yeah, I think with fungi, with insects, we need to rely in all biodiversity for solutions. So I think the space is huge, and society will get there. So we had a meeting in a partnership with a center based in Kenya that's called ISIPE. They work on insect and insect ecology, etc. They do great work, and they served a fantastic insect-based diet for dinner. And you could see some of the people having issues with this fried insect looking at you, etc., because we are not used to that. But then they explained that, yeah, for the time being, we just need to process that into a flour and integrate it with more nutritious cookies, etc., making sure people know what they are having. And then you move things and you start changing the culture from the consumer behavior side. And then they said they told this story about the early, like 100 years ago, and in Maine they have this penitentiary system, a big prison, and the cheapest food available to feed the prisoners was lobster, because there was plenty of lobster, and these prisoners were really mad because they did not like eating lobsters, and they managed to get an agreement that they would only be fed lobsters 3 times a week, and no more. And look at what has happened in 100 years. So we just need to speed that up, but there is ways to bring fungi and other solutions into the food systems as we need all tools to sort out the challenges.
Next question, Sophia. Then we go to Carl.
Yes, you mentioned a shift in the narrative from sectoral to systemic, and from an ecological standpoint or scientific aspect, that makes complete sense. But I was wondering from a financial aspect and driving investment in the field and those partnerships that you had mentioned, if that, I guess, prioritizing that narrative and showing that shift has been particularly compelling for driving investment.
We're not there yet, but we're seeing that the impact investors and some of the financial instruments are understanding that these transitions in economic terms, in financial terms, are positive, but they require some time to stabilize and to pay back. So we see that the financial sector, especially slowly understanding that they need to change how they provide support for this kind of transformations. But there is more and more understanding that without considering these factors, we're not supporting sustainability, and that sustainability pays off financially. A restored soil can take some time and cost to be brought back to life. But in terms of production, in terms of what it can deliver in the future, the gap is very positive. So we're working a lot on supporting that transition also from the financial sector, as an example.
Next question, Carl.
Thank you for the great presentation. My name is Pinto Marco from Mali, and I'm agroeconomist. So, my question is, so many programs has been supporting agricultural production development in many countries, especially for developing countries. But up to now, the development is still like very slow in my point of view. And my question is it the methodology, the problem, or the tools, the problem, or the people themselves is the problem? So if this is, which one is the problem? And if we have to develop our local solution for our agricultural development, which one we should be concentrating our efforts?
No, this is a great question, and in our unfortunately, I would say in development work, there is egos, there is institutional barriers, there is the culture that we want to do everything ourselves, and we don't necessarily have that capacity, those skills, or enough knowledge. So we see a lot of, efforts that are, driven from individual organizations where they want to reach into the community and work with them and then be able to celebrate success. And this is super ineffective and very costly. So we need to understand. The first thing is how you bundle, you aggregate in dialogue with the communities, which at the end it's their decisions, their development needs and technical change needs. How do you bundle knowledge, technology from across different organizations, different systems, and then how with national extension services, private sector, what are the best mechanisms to help deliver that knowledge? That brings, it's more efficient, and the adoption, the likelihood of success is much more important. And lastly, and this is something we're doing in CGIAR, we are separating what the science programs of CGIAR deliver in terms of outcomes. Of course, they're going to need to test if things work at the community level, etc., with what we're calling a new scaling program, because again, the skills, the partnerships, the networks you need to leverage are very different sometimes to those of the researchers. So we're working on embedding ourselves much better in those local innovation systems for greater success, because as you say, there is not enough change on the ground as needed, and that's well, it's not fair. It needs to change.
Last question, Professor Freedom.
Well, thank you. Just a quick one, and Cora did ask the question in I would say in a better way. One of the things we see is when we go to emerging markets and developing economies, there is a lot of plant breeding and all this wonderful seed development, like what you're doing with Cobra. But when it comes to getting the seeds certified and in the market, that always becomes an issue. So what is the role of CIAT in potentially making that possible for private companies, for community members to be able to access these seeds?
Well, I have quite a personal view about this, as in many other things. So the first thing is that seed systems are quite complex, and only some species can be promoted through the usual norms that we face at the moment in terms of registration, certification, the sanitary and phytosanitary controls, etc. That works up to a point for specific sectors, for specific conditions, but there is a huge gap on what I call sui generis systems for seed. And there is beautiful, and we have beautiful experience of community seed banks connected to their national gene banks, their national systems, where communities are able to provide healthy seed for their communities of a much higher number of crops. So we're talking about diversification, we're talking about leafy vegetables, some planting materials that are not you cannot find on the market, and they are able to provide 35% of the needs of those communities of planting material. So it's, again, it's not a silver bullet. You need, of course, to rely on the formal seed system because it delivers a lot, but then you need to look more holistically of how you look at these other more traditional, but still systems that we need to support that do the rest of the effort.
I think that's a very good note on which to close. We gotta look at the whole holistic picture. Thank you very much, Juan Lucas. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.